Hi, Dad. I thought because the World Series is starting, I would read you something Joe Posnanski wrote about Clayton Kershaw, and then something else about the World Series. Well, Lucy and the Cat tries to obscure my vision. So this piece is called, How Can We Make Sense of Clayton Kershaw's Postseason Woes? There's a clear reason why the Clayton Kershaw saga so fascinates and frustrates and infuriates baseball fans, and it is this. There isn't another story in sports exactly like it. You cannot find an all-time great in any other sport who has so regularly, so persistently, and so alarmingly stumbled in the biggest moments. John Elway does come to mind. Here was a guy who in his early years would will his teams to the Super Bowl only to flop miserably once he got there. 14 for 38 with 3 interceptions against Washington, 10 for 26 with a couple of picks against San Francisco, etc. But of course, Elway turned things around with some late career Super Bowl success, and when people talk about him, they do not talk about his inability to rise to the moment. Jerry West, the famous Laker, couldn't win a championship until the very end of his career, but even a quick glance at his record shows that he played heroically in the playoffs year after year, but just couldn't pull his team up there with him. So what all-time great the athlete would have to be an all-time great mirrors the regular season, postseason juxtaposition of Kershaw. Barry Sanders, Dan Marino, Karl Malone, Mike Gardner. No, for various reasons, none of them quite matches up with the weirdness and perplexing mystery of Kershaw's playoff woes. Now, let me state this clearly. I'm a huge Clayton Kershaw fan. Huge. And so, yes, my first instinct when talking about Kershaw in October is to shout out that he's had some fantastic postseason performances, and he has. Even in these playoffs, he pitched 8 shutout innings in the wild card round, striking out 13. True, it was against a Brewers team that had no business being in the playoffs, but it still counts. Kershaw had 11 strikeouts and allowed just 1 in 7 innings against Houston in Game 1 of the 2017 World Series. That was the performance that was supposed to end this whole nasty narrative. Look, in 10 different postseason games, Kershaw has gone at least 6 innings and given up 1 earned run or 0. The Dodgers won 9 of those 10 games. I mean, that's good. There are not many pitchers in baseball history who have had 10 postseason games with a game score. That's one of those new stats for figuring out how good a game is. And if you get near 100, it's like one of the best pitching performances ever. There are not many... Hi, Luthien. My cat is saying hi. See, there she is. Hi, Luth. Anyway, there are not many pitchers in baseball history who have had 10 postseason games with a game score of 65 or better. Most postseason starts with a 65-plus game score. Curt Schilling, 13, Tom Glavine, 11, Clayton Kershaw, Justin Verlander, John Smoltz, Andy Pettitte, Roger Clemens, 10, Christy Mathewson, Whitey Ford, 9. But this is just statistical trickery. For one thing, there's that word postseason. That has much less meaning now. Mathewson and Ford pitched all of their great games in the World Series. Plus, I just arbitrarily chose 65 as the game score. A 65 game score is a well-pitched game, but it is hardly legendary. If I had instead filtered this by complete game shutouts instead of game score, you would have Mathewson with 4 and Whitey Ford, Madison Bumgarner, 3-Finger Brown, and Josh Beckett with 3. Kershaw has never thrown a postseason shutout. Anyway, even with those 10 performances, there's a striking and painful contrast between regular season Kershaw and postseason Kershaw. Regular season Kershaw, 175 and 76, with a 2.43 ERA and 0.7 home runs per 9 innings. Postseason Kershaw, though, is 11 and 12 with a 4.31 ERA and 1.4 home runs, so double, per 9 innings. Hi, Luth. And what's worse, the further he has gone in the playoffs, the worse he's been. In wildcard games, he's 1-0 with a 0.00 ERA, and that was this year's Brewers game. In the National League Division Series, he's 6-4 with a 4.02 ERA. In the National League Championship Series, he's 3-6 with a 4.84 ERA, and in the World Series, he's 1-2 with a 5.40 ERA. There's so many theories about all this that it's hard to even keep track. One theory is that it's just a small sample size and as such can't be taken too seriously. Now, I'm sympathetic to this line, being a Kershaw apologist, but it is true that Kershaw has now thrown 177 and a third postseason innings, which would be enough to qualify for the ERA title in a full season. Yes, of course, it's a small sample size. Playoffs by their nature are small sample sizes, but that's a lot of innings. If Kershaw ever went 11 and 12 with a 4.31 ERA over a season, people would really worry. Another theory is that the Dodgers have not served him well. They have left him in games too long, or in terms that baseball fans can fully appreciate, they have Pedro'd him. Meaning Pedro Martinez for the Red Sox. I think there's something to this. They certainly Pedro'd Kershaw Thursday night against Atlanta. Going into the game, the Dodgers knew that he wasn't quite right. They had to scratch him from his start just 2 days earlier because of back spasms. The hope going into Thursday's game, you would think, was that he would be healthy enough to hold down the Braves for a few innings while the Dodgers lineup teed off on Atlanta's raw 22-year-old rookie starter Bryce Wilson. But it didn't work out that way. Instead, Wilson was breathtaking. He allowed just 1 hit in 6 innings, and suddenly there was an extreme pressure on Kershaw to match brilliance. Kershaw was not exactly on. His command seemed off all night, but he did manage to hold the Braves to 1 run in 5 innings. Then it was the 6th inning, and Kershaw was set up to face the Braves lineup for the 3rd time. Dodgers manager Dave Roberts certainly could have pulled him at that point. But I mean, he's Clayton Kershaw. How many times do you think the Dodgers have spoken those words? But I mean, he's Clayton Kershaw. Those are the words that pressed the Dodgers to bring him back out in last year's NLDS after he'd already got a key out in relief. He promptly gave up back-to-back home runs. That's what pushed them to keep Kershaw in the game in the 2017 World Series Game 5, even though it was clear he just didn't have it. Remember how they kept pitching him in Game 6 of the 2016 NLCS against the Cubs, even though he was giving up runs every inning? Then there was that time in the 2014 LDS against St. Louis. He was given a 4-run lead, and it was the 7th inning, and they just left him out there to suffer. The Cardinals teed off on him. 6 blasted hits. I mean, each one of them was blasted, some of the hardest hit balls imaginable. And Don Mattingly, who was the manager then, just sat there and watched it happen as if he was simply paralyzed. But I mean, he's Clayton Kershaw. So the Dodgers sent him out for the 6th inning Thursday. He fell behind in the count and gave up on an infield single to Ronald Acuna Jr. I'm sure nobody in the dugout thought that was a big deal. But while baseball's a slow game, things happen fast. Kershaw promptly gave up a run-scoring double to Freddie Freeman and another run-scoring double to Marcell Ozuna, and that is when they went to get him. Only then, but it was too late. It's just strange. Here's the greatest pitcher of his generation, one of the greatest of all time, and this thing just keeps happening. Who else has had such a bizarre split career? I suppose it's a little bit similar to Greg Maddux, who went 11-14 in the postseason, but much of Maddox's trouble was at least partially related to defense. He gave up 25 unearned runs in the postseason, which is by far the most of any pitcher in baseball history. Most unearned runs allowed postseason. Here's a side note. Maddux, Greg Maddux being, of course, 25. Tom Glavine, 11. Wade Hoyt, 11. Christy Mathewson, 11. George Mullen, 10. Tommy John, 10. I never appreciated just how many unearned runs those Braves teams allowed in the playoffs. Anyway, Maddux did not have nearly as many high-profile breakdowns as Kershaw has had. No all-time great has. Kershaw is one of my all-time favorite pitchers, and I will go to any extreme necessary to praise and defend him. But at some point, there's nothing really to say except that this whole thing is very, very strange. And for us Kershaw fans, quite sad. As of right now, you can't really tell the story of Kershaw's greatness without mentioning his postseason troubles. The Dodgers could still come back in this series, obviously, and Kershaw could still have some 2020 heroics left in him. But it's much more likely that those of us who keep waiting for Kershaw to drive a stake through the heart of this depressing story will just have to wait another year. Anyway, he wrote that obviously when the Dodgers were down 3-1, and now they're in the World Series and Kershaw's starting Game 1. So we'll see what happens. Love you, Dad.